What happens when ambition outshines success? When art dares the audience to care, but the box office turns away. The 1960s were a decade of revolution both on the streets and on the silver screen. Studios gambled millions chasing masterpieces that failed spectacularly, but time has a strange sense of justice. Today, those failures are worshipped. Here are 15 legendary flops that rose again from cinematic ruin. Number 15. Cleopatra, 1963. It was meant to be the film that saved 20th Century Fox, but it nearly destroyed it instead. Cleopatra was the most expensive production in history at the time, a 4-hour spectacle of love, power, and betrayal that turned into an uncontrollable storm behind the camera. Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra and Richard Burton as Mark Antony captured the imagination of the world, but also ignited one of Hollywood's most scandalous off-screen romances. Their affair was denounced by the Vatican itself, while studio executives watched helplessly as the budget ballooned from $2 million to over $40 million. Sets were torn down, and rebuilt entire scenes reshot after the original director was fired. Production delays bankrupted the studio, forcing Fox to sell parts of its backlot just to survive. When it finally premiered, critics were divided. Some hailed it as majestic, others as a bloated disaster. Audiences were curious but exhausted by the media frenzy. Cleopatra made money, but not enough to cover its massive cost. For years, it was labeled the ultimate cautionary tale of Hollywood excess. And yet decades later, cinephiles rediscovered its grandeur. The costumes, the music, the sheer audacity. What once symbolized failure became a cult triumph of impossible ambition. In its ruins lay the blueprint for every cinematic epic that followed. Cleopatra proved that even a doomed empire can leave behind immortal beauty. Number 14. The Fall of the Roman Empire, 1964. At a time when sword and sandal spectacles ruled the box office, The Fall of the Roman Empire was designed to be the ultimate historical epic. Produced by Samuel Bronston and filmed in Spain, it spared no expense. Thousands of extras, elaborate sets, and an immense replica of the Roman Forum. It should have been unstoppable. Instead, it was crushed under its own weight. The film chronicled the corruption of imperial power and the slow decay of Rome with a sense of tragic inevitability. Starring Sophia Loren, Stephen Boyd, and Alec Guinness, it told a story of loyalty lost and civilization collapsing from within. But audiences in the mid-60s were changing. They wanted modern thrillers and sharper stories, not grandiose morality tales. The movie's 3-hour runtime and somber tone alienated crowds expecting excitement and spectacle. Financially, it was catastrophic. The sets bankrupted Bronston's production company and ended his dream of creating a European Hollywood. Critics praised the artistry but condemned its pacing. For years, it was remembered only as an expensive monument to failure. Then came redemption. Directors like Ridley Scott and Stanley Kubrick cited it as a visual influence. Its sweeping camera work and atmospheric realism inspired future historical epics from Gladiator to Kingdom of Heaven. Today, film scholars call it one of the last truly handmade epics of the old world. The fall of the Roman Empire fell hard, but its ruins became sacred ground for modern cinema. Number 13. The Greatest Story Ever Told, 1965. When George Stevens announced he would film the life of Christ with all the power of Hollywood behind him, many believed it would be the definitive religious epic. Instead, it became a legend of excess and heartbreak. Shot across 5 states and multiple deserts, The Greatest Story Ever Told was supposed to be uplifting and profound. But its endless delays, unpredictable weather, and massive budget turned it into an ordeal. Max von Sydow as Jesus delivered a serene performance surrounded by an all-star cast including John Wayne as a Roman centurion. Yet that single cameo became infamous. Audiences laughed when Wayne solemnly declared, "Surely this man was the man of God." What was meant to inspire faith instead provoked ridicule. The studio panicked, cutting scenes and reshaping edits, but the damage was done. The film cost nearly $20 million and earned only half. Critics called it slow, lifeless, and overproduced. George Stevens' reputation suffered for years, as the movie was used as an example of how Hollywood misunderstood spirituality. But time rewrote its fate. The widescreen photography, the meditative pacing, the haunting score by Alfred Newman, these elements later earned admiration from historians and religious scholars. It became a fixture of Easter broadcasts, rediscovered by a generation raised on television epics. The greatest story ever told may have stumbled at the box office, but it achieved something far more enduring. It turned failure into reverence and proved that faith in cinema sometimes just takes a few decades to find its believers. Number 12. Dr. Dolittle, 1967. When 20th Century Fox tried to chase family-friendly magic after Cleopatra's disaster, they thought a musical about a man who talks to animals would be their salvation. Instead, Dr. Dolittle became another financial shipwreck. Starring Rex Harrison, the film was based on the beloved children's books by Hugh Lofting. On paper, it had everything: lavish sets, exotic animals, and cheerful songs like Talk to the Animals. But what unfolded behind the camera was chaos. The animals refused to cooperate and many fell ill. Entire shooting days were lost as horses refused to move and parrots flew away. The set smelled so bad crew members wore masks to breathe. The location shooting in England was cursed by constant rain and disease outbreaks among livestock. Rex Harrison's perfectionism added further tension. His arrogance alienated co-stars and crew. When the film finally wrapped, the budget had soared past $17 million, astronomical for a musical at the time. Critics were merciless. They called it stiff, overlong, and artificial. Audiences stayed home. The losses nearly bankrupted Fox again. Even the studio's Oscar campaign turned into a joke after it bought massive ads begging for Academy votes. But as the years passed, something strange happened. The film found a second life on television, where children embraced its eccentric charm. Its whimsical world became a comfort for generations raised in the 60s and 70s. Today, Dr. Dolittle stands as a time capsule of overblown innocence. It reminds us that sometimes failure wears the brightest colors and still manages to sing. Number 11. Paint Your Wagon, 1969. Imagine Clint Eastwood and Lee Marvin singing in a Western musical. That sentence alone captures why Paint Your Wagon was doomed at birth and destined for cult immortality. Produced at the tail end of the Hollywood musical era, this big-budget adaptation of the Broadway hit cost a staggering $20 million. The story followed two rugged gold prospectors who end up sharing a wife during the California gold rush. It was part comedy, part tragedy, and mostly confusion. The production was an ordeal. The cast and crew lived in freezing mountain conditions in Oregon. Sets washed away in storms. Director Joshua Logan fought exhaustion and depression, while studio executives demanded rewrites. Clint Eastwood admitted later that he hated singing, and Lee Marvin was frequently drunk during filming. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, costs had spiraled out of control. When it premiered, critics were baffled. Some praised its ambition, while others mocked its strange tone. The film's length, almost 3 hours, tested audiences' patience. Financially, it collapsed. Paramount lost millions, and critics buried the idea of the Western musical for good. Yet decades later, Paint Your Wagon became an oddball favorite among collectors and musical lovers. Its folk songs, its wild energy, and its refusal to fit any genre made it unforgettable. In a way, it captured the chaos of a decade collapsing into change. The 60s ended with cowboys singing about love, freedom, and greed, and that contradiction became its legacy. Number 10. Hello, Dolly, 1969. By the late 60s, the musical era was dying, but no one told 20th Century Fox. They poured more than $25 million into Hello, Dolly, a Technicolor explosion meant to resurrect the spirit of old Hollywood. Instead, it became a symbol of excess and changing times. Directed by Gene Kelly and starring Barbra Streisand as Dolly Levi, it was filled with dazzling sets, grand parades, and hundreds of extras. Every scene glittered with perfection. But behind the spectacle, tension simmered. Streisand was only 26, playing a widowed matchmaker twice her age. Her clashes with co-star Walter Matthau became legendary. They reportedly despised each other and refused to speak off camera. Audiences sensed something artificial. Released during the age of Easy Rider and Woodstock, its cheerful optimism felt outdated. Critics mocked it as plastic and soulless. The box office returns were disastrous, and Fox once again faced financial peril. The irony was cruel. 3 of the biggest flops of the decade came from the same studio. But time worked its quiet magic. Hello Dolly's songs endured in pop culture. Its lush cinematography influenced filmmakers like Baz Luhrmann and Damien Chazelle. It later won Oscars and became a fixture in musical retrospectives. Decades after its failure, Hello Dolly found new life as a love letter to old Hollywood. It became a reminder that even when the curtain falls too soon, some melodies never stop echoing. Number 9. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, 1968. It was colorful. It was cheerful. It was built to print money. Yet somehow, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang crashed and burned before ever taking flight. Based on Ian Fleming's children's book and produced by Albert Broccoli of James Bond fame, the film told the story of an eccentric inventor who builds a flying car for his children. With songs by the Sherman Brothers and Dick Van Dyke in the lead, it was expected to enchant families worldwide, but production turned into a mechanical nightmare. Filming stretched for months due to weather disasters and malfunctioning car props. The budget swelled past $10 million, a colossal sum for a family adventure in the 60s. Critics were lukewarm when it finally premiered. They found it too long, too sugary, and oddly uneven. The pacing dragged and audiences drifted. The movie barely made its budget back. For United Artists, it was an embarrassment, yet the magic refused to die. When the film hit television in the 70s, it became a cult favorite. Children fell in love with its dreamlike visuals and haunting villain the child catcher. The car itself became a pop culture icon. What was once considered a misfire grew into one of the most beloved family fantasies ever made. Time gave Chitty Chitty Bang Bang the wings it was always meant to have. Its failure proved that sometimes wonder needs a second chance to fly. Number 8. 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968. Today it is hailed as one of the greatest films ever made. But in 1968, Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey was treated like an alien invasion. When it premiered, audiences were baffled. The dialogue was sparse, the pace glacial, and the story mystifying. Many walked out mid-screening. MGM executives panicked as critics dismissed it as self-indulgent and incoherent. Newspapers mocked it as a 3-hour science lecture. Box office receipts plummeted after opening week. It seemed Kubrick's ambitious experiment in cosmic philosophy had failed spectacularly. Behind the scenes, Kubrick was devastated. He had poured years into perfecting the visuals, using groundbreaking techniques that pushed cinema beyond anything ever seen. But the studio wanted another crowd pleaser, not a meditative journey through space and time. Then something unexpected happened. Young viewers began attending midnight showings under the influence of counterculture fascination. They saw what the critics missed, a transcendental odyssey about evolution and destiny. Word of mouth spread. Screenings sold out. The same critics who dismissed it were forced to rewatch and rethink. Decades later, 2001 became the gold standard of science fiction. Its influence can be traced through Star Wars, Blade Runner, and nearly every major sci-fi saga that followed. Kubrick's failure turned into a cosmic prophecy. What once looked like madness revealed itself as genius ahead of its time. Number 7. The Night of the Iguana, 1964. John Huston's The Night of the Iguana was supposed to be a prestige hit blending Tennessee Williams's poetic despair with Hollywood glamour. Instead, it sparked scandal disarray and near financial collapse. Filmed on location in Mexico, it starred Richard Burton, Ava Gardner, and Deborah Kerr in a tense story of a defrocked minister seeking redemption in a rundown coastal hotel. The setting was as steamy as the script. Local gossip papers exploded with rumors of affairs between cast members and crew. Huston's drinking matched Burton's legendary excess, and the production spiraled into chaos. When the film finally premiered, audiences were torn. Some critics praised its artistry and depth, while others found it vulgar and overwrought. The censorship boards nearly banned it in several countries for its themes of desire and moral decay. Financially, it underperformed, and MGM wrote it off as another failed art house gamble. But like The Lost Souls, it depicted the night of the iguana endured. Over time, its raw honesty and fevered performances won new respect. The movie is now regarded as one of Huston's finest works, a blend of emotional violence and beauty unmatched in its era. The Mexican town where it was filmed later became a tourist haven named after the production. From scandal to salvation, it transformed from Hollywood embarrassment to timeless masterpiece. A film once trapped by chaos became a hymn for the broken and the bold. Number 6. The Trial, 1962. Orson Welles called it his best film, but the world called it a mess. The Trial was a surreal adaptation of Franz Kafka's novel and a commercial catastrophe. Shot across Europe on borrowed sets, the film starred Anthony Perkins as a man accused of an unnamed crime in a world that made no sense. Welles directed, wrote, and edited it himself, fighting studios and financiers who didn't understand his vision. He shot in abandoned buildings in Paris and the empty Gare d'Orsay station long before it became a museum. The atmosphere was bleak and nightmarish. When it premiered, critics were bewildered. They expected another Citizen Kane. Instead, they got a fever dream about bureaucracy, guilt, and madness. American audiences avoided it completely. Distributors buried it, and reviewers dismissed it as incomprehensible European nonsense. But time revealed the genius. Its stark lighting and oppressive architecture influenced generations of filmmakers from Terry Gilliam to David Lynch. The Trial became a cult favorite among cinephiles who saw in it the perfect cinematic translation of existential dread. Though it destroyed any hope of Welles regaining mainstream Hollywood power, the film's shadow loomed over the art house world. It proved that visionaries often fail before they are understood. The Trial went from commercial ruin to artistic scripture, a reminder that confusion is sometimes the highest form of truth. Number 5. It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, 1963, a race for buried treasure. Dozens of comedy legends, a studio determined to make the funniest film ever made. And yet, when It's a Mad, 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 Mad World opened, it nearly bankrupted United Artists. Director Stanley Kramer assembled an all-star cast, Sid Caesar, Mickey Rooney, Ethel Merman, and more, for an epic slapstick adventure. The film was massive in every sense. It ran over 3 hours and featured elaborate car crashes that destroyed real vehicles by the dozen. The sets spanned deserts, highways, and airplane runways. Costs soared past $10 million. Critics were split. Some called it exhausting. Others thought it brilliant but indulgent. Audiences were bewildered by its length and chaotic tone. After a strong opening weekend, attendance plummeted. United Artists spent years trying to recover the losses, but as the decades passed, its legend grew. The film became a staple of midnight screenings and VHS collections. Younger viewers rediscovered its anarchic energy and physical comedy. It inspired later ensemble comedies like The Cannonball Run and Rat Race. Today, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World stands as one of the most ambitious comedies ever made. A glorious mess that proved excess could be its own form of genius. Its failure paved the road for every cinematic farce that followed. Number 4. Two for the Road, 1967. In the decade of free love and rebellion, Two for the Road dared to show the other side, the slow disintegration of marriage. Starring Audrey Hepburn and Albert Finney, it was stylish, modern, and emotionally raw. But audiences rejected it. Director Stanley Donen crafted the film as a non-linear mosaic tracing a couple's 12-year relationship through flashbacks and road trips across Europe. The dialogue was sharp, the tone bittersweet, the visuals elegant. Critics praised its honesty, but viewers were confused by its fragmented structure. The 60s audience wanted escapism, not reflection. The film earned poor box office returns, and Fox quietly buried it. Behind the scenes, tension simmered as Hepburn struggled with the emotional intensity of the role. Donen demanded multiple takes. Finney's improvisations clashed with Hepburn's precision. The set became a battle of methods and moods. When the film flopped, critics called it too cynical, too modern, and too sad for its time. But the years softened perception. Cinephiles rediscovered it as one of Hepburn's finest performances, vulnerable, fierce, and hauntingly real. Its editing style influenced countless romantic dramas from Annie Hall to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. What was once a heartbreak for its creators became a mirror for every generation that loved and lost. Two for the Road proved that box office numbers fade, but emotional truth endures forever. Number 3. The Haunting, 1963. Few horror films from the 1960s dared to unsettle the mind instead of the senses. The Haunting did both and paid the price for it. Directed by Robert Wise and based on Shirley Jackson's chilling novel The Haunting of Hill House, it was a psychological horror masterpiece that terrified critics but terrified audiences into staying away. Shot in eerie black and white and filled with subtle camera tricks, it avoided blood and monsters entirely. The fear came from suggestion from whispers and creaks, and what the viewer imagined but never saw. Studio executives worried that the film was too strange and too quiet. They wanted a traditional ghost story, but Wise delivered something cerebral and deeply tragic. The film opened to poor attendance. Audiences wanted shock value, not psychological dread. Critics praised its intelligence, but the marketing department had no idea how to sell it. By the end of its run, it barely broke even and was quickly forgotten. But decades later, filmmakers hailed it as the definitive haunted house film. Its influence can be traced directly to The Shining, Poltergeist, and the others. Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg both called it one of the scariest films ever made. Its sound design became legendary among horror purists. The Haunting failed in its time because it was too subtle, too elegant, too daring. But that same restraint made it timeless. It showed that horror can whisper and still shake the soul. Number 2. Bonnie and Clyde, 1967. Before it became a cultural milestone, Bonnie and Clyde was nearly destroyed by fear. Warner Brothers executives panicked after early screenings. Critics despised it. The New York Times called it repellent. The violence was too realistic, the humor too dark. The blend of love story and massacre left audiences confused. For months, the studio barely promoted it and considered pulling it from release entirely. Directed by Arthur Penn and starring Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, the film told the story of two doomed outlaws during the Great Depression. It was stylish, shocking, and unapologetically modern. The editing was lightning fast. The gunfights looked real. The blood was startling. Older audiences recoiled, but younger viewers saw rebellion on screen, a mirror of their own frustration with authority. After critics like Pauline Kael championed it, the tide turned. Word spread. Crowds returned. What was a bomb became a sensation. Bonnie and Clyde went on to earn Oscar nominations and redefine American cinema. Its legacy cannot be overstated. It paved the way for the new Hollywood movement of the 70s, inspiring films like Taxi Driver and Easy Rider. What began as a studio embarrassment ended as a revolution. Bonnie and Clyde proved that sometimes a movie has to die once before it can live forever. Number 1. Lawrence of Arabia, 1962. Today, it is revered as one of the greatest achievements in cinema history. But when Lawrence of Arabia first hit theaters, it nearly bankrupted Columbia Pictures. David Lean's epic about T.E. Lawrence, the enigmatic British officer who united Arab tribes during World War I, was breathtakingly ambitious. Shot across Jordan, Morocco, and Spain, it captured endless deserts and monumental battles. But its length, over 3.5 hours, tested audiences' patience. Early critics found it slow. Studio executives cut 40 minutes to make it more commercial, which only confused viewers more. Production had been nightmarish. Peter O'Toole suffered injuries in the desert heat. Cameras broke daily. Camels died during filming. Lean clashed with producers over budget and tone. By the time the film premiered, the cost had exceeded $15 million, a staggering gamble in the early 60s. Initial box office returns were disappointing, and reviewers predicted ruin. But the film refused to fade. When it was restored years later with the missing footage, audiences finally saw the masterpiece Lean intended. Critics reappraised it, calling it a symphony of light and sand. It swept the Oscars and influenced generations of filmmakers from George Lucas to Christopher Nolan. Lawrence of Arabia began as a burden and ended as a beacon. It proved that art does not obey time or money, it simply endures. These cinematic misfires remind us that failure and genius often share the same frame. The 60s were full of dreams too large for their era, yet perfect for ours. Every flop on this list became a monument to risk and imagination. Which of these legendary failures do you love most? Like, share, and subscribe for more hidden histories of the silver screen.